If you live in the Cedar Valley and hear the name Sartori, you probably think of the local hospital in Cedar Falls. But just who is or was Sartori, and why is there a hospital with that name? These voices of the past will tell the story of an immigrant couple who came to the village of Sturgis Falls and became leading citizens as the village blossomed into Cedar Falls.
Beautiful, just beautiful. This is my favorite place in the whole wide world and in the other world. I visit my house as often as I can. You see, this is my house. My husband Joseph built this for me in 1866. Just for me. You're probably wondering who I am and what I am doing here. Well, let me tell you, I have a story to share with you. Yes, this house was built for me. My name is Teresa Sartori, and I have an exciting story to tell you. My husband and I were both born in the town of Baden in Germany. Now, I was born in 1833 and my Joseph was born 2 years earlier than I was. And we grew up with very different backgrounds. Joseph came from a working class family, whereas I came from a privileged family. Joseph had the traditional public education, whereas I had gone to a private school. We met when we were teenagers, and we fell madly in love. Joseph had just finished up training to become a stonemason, a stone layer, a bricklayer, and a plasterer, and oh, he had succeeded in each of these areas. He had chosen this profession because wherever he went in the world, wherever life took him, he knew he would always be able to find work. Well, like I said, we fell in love and we went to my father for permission for Joseph to marry me. Now, my father was the burgomaster of the town, which means he was the mayor, and he held a very prominent position. And he was a very prominent mover and shaker of Baden, and he refused to let us marry. Well, I knew, and Joseph knew, that the only reason Papa denied us his blessing was that Joseph wasn't good enough for his daughter. So Joseph leaves. He came to America in 1853. Oh, but that's not the end of the romance. Oh, no, 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 no. We wrote many, many letters back and forth. And finally, 4 years later, Joseph had saved enough money for me to come to America. Well, by this time, I was of age, and although Papa was very unhappy, I came, and Joseph met me as I got off the boat in New York City. Oh, how exciting it was to see him again. It had been 4 long years. Well, we went immediately to New Jersey, where we were married. Oh, it wasn't fancy. It was the minister and his wife and the two of us. And we got on a train and headed for Iowa. I didn't know where Iowa was. I just knew it was a long train ride. We took the train and we rode from New Jersey to Chicago. It wasn't much of a town at that time. A lot of wooden buildings. And we spent a couple of days in Chicago. And then we went on to the Mississippi River. Oh my, what a big river. And we ferried across. And from this point on, we had to go by wagon. Now, the train was swaying back and forth, but oh, those wagons. There were no roads. It was bumpy. It took forever to get to this little town called Cedar Falls, Iowa, out in the middle of nowhere. But we were young, and we were in love, and we were up for a challenge. So Joseph built our first home. Oh, not with brick, and not with stone, logs. It was a log home. Dirt floor. This is not the kind of living I was used to, but we survived. We lived in that little place for a couple of years, and then our son, Joseph Francis, was born, and we really needed a better place, so we rented a place close to the downtown area until we could afford to build our forever home. We had a good time. We really had a good time. Little Joseph, and he was always known as Little Joe. Even as an adult, he was always Little Joe. Little Joe was a doll. He was charming, he was bright. And 3 years later, his little brother, Ludwig, was born. Oh, another beautiful baby boy. These two boys played together, they had a good time together, but then something happened. And it was the darkest moment of our entire married life. The boys were outside playing, as they did every day. And being a mother, I sensed something was wrong. I said to Joseph, "Joe, where's your brother?" "I don't know." And we couldn't find Ludwig. I called the neighbors to come and help. We called for Joseph to come home from work. We scoured the neighborhood. There was no Ludwig anywhere. I went to the well to get a bucket of water. And when I looked down, there was a little hand floating. Ludwig had drowned. It was awful. From that day on, I spoiled little Joe so much. Even my friends would tell me, "You are spoiling that boy." If Papa had left a series of chores for little Joe to do, I usually did them for him. He would say, "Mama, I am not made to do physical work. I am made to do mental work." Yes, I did spoil him. Evidently, I didn't spoil him too much because he, as an adult, he became a very successful banker in California. What was Joseph doing at this time? Oh my goodness, my Joseph was so busy. Go to the downtown of Cedar Falls, Iowa, and you look up at those buildings. A good share of those buildings were built by my Joseph. Do you know the Burr Hotel? It's just a little bit off of First Street. I think it's now called the Black Hawk. Joseph built that. There's even a building downtown, if you look up high, and it says Sartori. That was one of Joseph's buildings. His business was highly successful, highly successful. And then in the year 1866, our someday home became a reality. I was given by my husband the most beautiful, the most modern, the most up-to-date in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Beautiful home. Did you notice the arches over the windows? I'll tell you a little secret. Those aren't wood. Those are metal, so they'll never rot. I just had the most wonderful home. I had real floors, beautiful rugs. We had a basement. It was not a very high basement. It was used for food that had been preserved. And we also had a dirt floor, and we would put our vegetables down and cover them with sand, and oh, they lasted a long time. I had stoves to heat the house, not just fireplaces, and I had several stoves on the first floor. The most beautiful thing in the whole house was my white marble fireplace. Beautiful. Joseph really spoiled me. I had this gorgeous black walnut banister coming down from the second floor. And there were so many rooms. At first, I didn't know where I was. I would have to stop and think about how I got from here to there. Oh, it was so exciting. And I loved to entertain, and I did. When little Joe was about 13 years old, Joseph arranged his schedule so that we could make a trip back to Germany. And he arranged it so that we could be gone for the whole summer. We felt it was very important that little Joe know his grandparents. And so we went back. But you want to know something? Having seen pictures of our home, my papa welcomed Joseph with open arms. Finally, Papa admitted that Joseph was the right husband for me. And we had a wonderful time those 3 months we were there. We had always spoken German in the home, so when we went over, young Joe could communicate with his aunts and uncles and cousins, and we had such a wonderful time. We even brought a nephew back with us, which started a whole series of immigration by other relatives coming over to the New World, and many settled in Iowa. So what did I do all day long? Well, I kept house, of course, but you know, there was a horrible period in our country's history when the war was going on for 4 years. A group of us ladies got together and we decided we needed to do something for the war effort. The only ladies' organizations were within their churches. So our church had a ladies' organization, a Baptist church, the Lutheran churches, the Methodist churches, all had ladies' organizations. But these ladies didn't mingle outside of their faith. But when the war came along, it became apparent that if we all got together, we could do something for the war effort. Oh, we raised money any way we could. We held dinners. We would have chicken dinners. We would have soup suppers. The best, most well attended, and the most fun were the ice cream socials that we had. Our husbands would crank the ice cream, and we wives would bake cakes, and we would set up the tables, and we charged 10 cents for adults and a nickel for children. And they were huge successes. We earned a lot of money. What did we do with that money? Every single soldier that left for the war from Cedar Falls, Iowa, was outfitted in a full uniform, from boots all the way on up to hats. Now at this time, all the uniforms were different. Each little town had their own uniform, but our boys went away well dressed. What else did we do? Well, we rolled bandages. We sent medicine to our boys. We had a farmer give us several acres of land, women, and we went out and we planted food. We dug the earth, we weeded, we hauled water, and we harvested. And most of that we sent to our boys. We had potatoes. It seemed like we dug tons of potatoes. We had carrots. We had peas and beans that we could dry so we could send and they would not rot. What we didn't send to the boys, we doled out to the families of the soldiers. It was a wonderful way for the ladies of the town to get to know one another. And then the war was over. And we all went back to our little church groups. But we missed that. So my neighbor, Sarah Rydell and I must tell you a quick little thing about Sarah. Sarah was a young mother, a young bride, moved in 2 houses down the street, and I took dinner in and, you know, some flowers, just like I did anybody else. And we hit it off, and it was the strangest friendship. We were the best of friends, but I was 35 years older than she, and this friendship continued forever. Anyway, Sarah and I had decided we needed to get together again. So we started the Cedar Falls Women's Club. And it was open to all of these lovely ladies that we missed. Oh, I hope that has continued, because it was such a wonderful experience. It was not just social, but it was also an educational experience. Oh, the times we had. We met in homes at first, and then eventually we had to go to churches because the women's club became so large and we didn't have any other place to meet. I lived in this house until Christmas Eve, 1901. I'd had a wonderful life. Joseph was the best husband. Little Joe was a wonderful son. But in my later years, I came down with cancer. And those last few months were not pleasant. But little Joe was with us, Joseph was with me, and I took my last breath on Christmas Eve, 1901. I've been visiting ever since then. Nobody sees me. Nobody really knows I've been here. But I've been here checking up on my house. After my death, my husband Joseph and little Joe, by now they were both very wealthy. They wanted to give a memorial to the town of Cedar Falls. And as I looked around, what did Cedar Falls not have? A hospital. So the two Josephs had planned on donating money to the Cedar Falls, to the city of Cedar Falls, to start a hospital as a memorial to me. In the meantime, Joseph passes away. So young Joe went to the city and said, we need a hospital. And we need a hospital at the edge of town on 6th Street. And I will donate $25,000. And you, the city of Cedar Falls, has to match that. The strings that were attached was, the hospital is to be called the Sartori Memorial Hospital in honor of my mother Teresa and my father Joseph. What a lovely gesture to be done by a son. And that's my story. Maybe I'll see you again.
Samuel Round was an entrepreneur, a farmer, and an adventurer. He was a risk-taker and visionary. His voice of the past tells stories from his first general store, to his search for gold, to his unique way of purchasing land. This self-made man became the first land developer in the town, and through his wealth, gave generously to the town, civic activities, and his church.
Samuel Hopkins Round here. Howdy, folks. I've been expecting you. You know, if you walk out the Fairview Cemetery, there's a whole lot of us out there. There's our family. We're surrounded with our children and our children's families. And I bet a lot of you wonder who we are or what we're doing here. Well, you know, some say that I was a land developer. Some say I was a farmer. Some say I was a pioneer. And some people say that I was one of the founders of the city. I guess I was all of those, but I'll leave that up to you. So I tell you what, I have a story to tell. So why don't you grab a cup of tea and meet me out here at the barn, and I'll tell you my story. Well, folks, I'll tell you my story here. I was born in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. It's where my family lived. Actually, my ancestors came to Maryland, and they came before the Revolutionary War, and some of them even fought in the Revolutionary War. But anyway, I was born in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. I lived there until I was about a year. And then my parents moved to Barnesville, Ohio. And Barnesville, Ohio was a small town of about 3 cabins. And that's where I grew up, and Barnesville grew up too at the same time. And it was while I was there that I learned to be a potter when I was 17 years old. Didn't much like that job very well, but at least it was a trade. It was something that I could do for the rest of my life if I needed to. And then I taught school for a year. And I didn't like that very well either. So my dad convinced me to come back and work with him, and he taught me how to be a tanner. And so I learned the tanning trade as well. And it was about during that time that I learned the tanning trade, and I became sweet on this gal, Liza Philpott. And Liza Philpott and I got married. And Liza and I then moved to Somerville, Ohio. Now we moved to Somerville because it was a place where it had a stand of trees that had the right kind of bark so that I could tan the deer hides with. And that's where we spent our young life. Now Somerville, Ohio, well, life was really tough for us in the beginning. We had this cabin that didn't have any chicken in it. And that's where, you know, the stuff between the logs. So if you wanted to get to the loft, you just climb up on the inside of the wall. We didn't have a fireplace in the cabin. So poor Liza had to go outside and do all of her cooking and all of the washing and the canning, and everything had to be done outside. Life was really tough. But in that first year, we worked hard, and we made enough money that we paid off all of our debt. All $300 that we owed, we were debt-free, and for the rest of our life, we were debt-free. But as the town grew and we grew, and our family grew, why we had, I opened a general store there. I had a tanning and pottery shop. I had a saddle and a harness shop. I also had a shoe shop. So I had had sources of income coming in. Some of my great fond memories of Somerville, Ohio in our early years was, and some of the things that formulated who I was that I was a strong, had a strong faith. And I started the Methodist Church there in Somerville. And in fact, our first church would meet in our general store. And our parishioners would bring hides in, and they'd lay the hides down on the floor, and the preacher, the circuit rider, would come and he would preach the sermon in the general store with the family sitting on their hides on the floor. Now we built a first church, and that church grew, and as the town grew, I started a second Methodist church there. And I also built a temperance hall. One thing though, I was opposed to slavery. And so I was big on the Underground Railroad of Ohio. You know, the slaves would come in, the runaway slaves would come into town, and we would hide them or help them get on to the next station. It was pretty dangerous work and a dangerous deal, but it was something I felt strongly about and needed to do that. Well, after a while, the store and the shops were all were working on their own, and I had some time in my hand, and it was 1849, and something happened in America at that time. Gold was discovered in California. Well, you know, I've always been a risk taker, as you can tell by my life, so my brother-in-law, George Philpott, and his father-in-law, and myself, we went out to California. We were going to strike it rich out there. Well, we didn't strike it rich. And we came back home pretty much empty-handed. But it was during this trip that we crossed the plains, and as we crossed the plains of Iowa or Illinois and Iowa and Minnesota, and that we began to realize that this was a wonderful country. And the thought occurred to us that we would have a better chance of making money by investing in the plains rather than in gold. So on a trip in 1850 that George and I had gone through Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota, and we were making this circle around through Iowa back to Ohio, and we ran across this small area on the Cedar River called Sturgis Falls. They had 2 cabins and 3 families. I'm not exactly sure the dynamics of that, but they were existing together. It felt right. It felt like home. It felt like a place I wanted to be in. And so I bought some land here. I bought the land here. And then as each summer would go by, I would come out and I would buy more land and more land. And eventually I moved 2 of my children out here. 2 of my sons came out here with their families so that they could manage the land and manage the farms that we had going out here. And by 1859, I moved Liza and the rest of my family out here, and we brought infant William, and we brought Murray, and we brought Martha with us, and buried. Those were some of my children that didn't survive in Ohio, but we brought them with us as we wanted the family to be together. Poor William, he was only a year and a half when he died. I had a vat he was a toddler running around in the tannery, and he fell into a vat of tanning solution and drowned. But anyway, here we all are now. We're out here, and I had 4,000 acres of land in Cedar Falls. I had the land from what is now Hudson Road all the way to what is now Round Street, that's named after me. I had the land from University Avenue out to Viking Road. I had what is now Cedar Heights, and I had what is now the university, where the university is. If you put a fence around all that, that would be about 11 miles of land. The United States was involved in the Mexican War, and they paid their soldiers with land certificates. Well, most of these soldiers were not going to come out to the frontier and cash in their land certificates, so they were just sitting useless in people's drawers. So I went and offered them 25 cents, 50 cents, maybe $1 for their land certificate, and I would get these land certificates, and each year then I would come back to Cedar Falls and I would cash them in. For each land certificate was worth an acre of land, and that's how I got the 4,000 acres. All told, I paid $3,500 for the land, and about 88 cents an acre. Well, as we were living in town, and in 1863, we built the house and we built the barn, and we were able to move out here to South Main. As we were out here at South Main, I had all of my family members had a farm, and son George had a farm down a half mile down the road. This is where Liza and I spent the rest of our life here on this location. But you know, I was a generous man, and I gave away a lot of money. I gave money to help bring the Iowa Central Railroad here. I gave money to the Freedmen's Association, so the Freedmen Aid, to help the runaway slaves. And I gave money to temperance organizations. And I gave a lot of money to build the Methodist Church, that big limestone building down on 8th and Washington in Cedar Falls. And that building still stands, 175 years old. One thing about my life, though, is that I didn't much care for lawsuits. I got to tell you this story. It's a funny story. And so one day there were two. I was known as the negotiator, or as the arbitrator of Cedar Falls. And as I said, people recognized me as a fair man. So two men came to me with an animal, and they both claimed that they owned that animal. Well, I was patient and I listened to both men. They both had their say with what they wanted to tell me. And I listened, and I asked them each what they thought the animal was worth. And they told me. And as we determined the value of the animal, I wrote out a check for half and gave it to each man, paid them half for the animal, and I kept the animal, and everybody was happy. Well, folks, it's time for me to say goodbye and bring this to a close. You've heard my story, and I've got some chores to do here. But I'm proud of the fact that some of the buildings that we have, the house here, the barn, this barn, the round barn, and the house there, and the First United Methodist Church are all standing. What a great legacy to leave. So, as I say goodbye, I would just say to you, if you're up at Fairview Cemetery sometime, don't forget, as you walk by my tombstone, to put your hand on the tombstone and just say howdy.
Barbara Bemler was an early pioneer of Cedar Falls, arriving in Sturgis Falls in 1858. She was a mother of 11 and sent 5 sons off to fight for the Union Army in the Civil War. She was one of a group of ladies in town who tailored uniforms for the Pioneer Greys, a group of young men from Cedar Falls fighting together in the Civil War. She was an active leader in town that helped to establish the first Lutheran church and the Civil War Soldiers' Orphans Home.
Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you could join me today here at this house. This is my stepson, George Henry Bemler Jr.'s house. He lives here in this home with his wife Elizabeth and their 5 children. I am Barbara Bemler. I married his father, George Henry Bemler Sr. Well, as for me, I was born Barbara Schaffner in the Alsace region near Germany and France. I was born on the 22nd of March, 1819. My father fought in Napoleon's army, and he was killed in Algiers. At the time I was born, the Alsace region was controlled by France. Even though my maiden name was Schaffner, you might think I was German, but actually I was born in France. I came to the U.S. in 1843 as a young woman in my early 20s, and that's when I met George Henry Bemler Sr. He was an older man, a widower, near his late 30s, and he had 4 children. After I married him, we had 7 children together. So you see, we had a very large family. There was Barbara, Frederick, George Henry Jr., Philip, Charles, Jacob, Edward, William, Elizabeth, Theodore, and John. So you see, we did have a very large family. My husband had a very good friend by the name of Solomon Humbert, and he persuaded him to move our family to Cedar Falls, and we arrived here around 1858. My husband established a shoemaking shop on Main Street and powered all the machinery with the power from the mill race. It became a rather large shop, and he employed as many as 12 men, and they made shoes and boots for all ages of the family. Cedar Falls was a young city when we moved here, only about 5 years old. We decided we should establish a church here. And so my husband and I established a Lutheran church, and my husband was very instrumental in its construction. It was a white framed building located on 8th and Tremont Streets. Later on, the building was rebuilt a couple of times and finally moved. Today you will find it as St. John Lutheran Church, located on 8th and College Streets. We had only lived in this town for a few short years when war broke out, the Civil War. That was in 1861, and my oldest son, Charlie, went off to fight in the war. He joined the first group of young men who went off to fight in the Civil War from this area. They called themselves the Pioneer Greys. We mothers set out to find the best quality fabrics we could in order to make uniforms for our boys. We had gray pants, navy shirts, and caps that completed each outfit, and each outfit was completely tailored to fit each soldier. After the boys left for the war, we all saw them off at the train station, and the mothers of the soldiers began to form a Ladies' Aid Society. We collected food, clothing, and medical supplies to be sent to our boys in the field. And we planned social events. They were the highlight of the area, and also fundraisers. We had ice cream socials, community dinners, theatrical productions, and dramatic readings. All of this raised money that we used to help ship the items to our boys in the field. We rolled bandages, sorted donations, packed up the boxes, and shipped them on the rail cars. The railroad ended in Cedar Falls in those days, and it was the way that we got all of our shipments to our boys in the field. The railroad took the shipments to Dubuque, where they were put on a boat and shipped south on the Mississippi River. But the families of the soldiers here at home were suffering. Sometimes the pay didn't come for the soldiers on time, and they didn't have enough money to meet their day-to-day expenses. Well, it is never acceptable for the families of our soldiers fighting for us to be suffering here at home. We saw that, and so did Mr. Dempsey Overman. He provided an entire acre of land that was cleared and plowed and ready for planting. And we put in potato starts. We had a potato planting bee, and we planted potatoes in that acre of ground. In July, the men of the town weeded that tater patch while we women fixed a picnic lunch. And by the fall, when all the men were busy harvesting their own farm fields, we women came back and we harvested the tater patch. We got 100 bushels of potatoes out of that acre, and we sent 60 bushels to our boys in the field and 40 bushels to their families here at home. The war finally ended in 1865, and it was time to celebrate. An extra edition of the Gazette was printed. The old cannon was fired, and over 3,000 people were in town by nightfall. We had fireworks, and we celebrated. The soldiers themselves came home around the 4th of July, and we, the Ladies' Aid Society, planned a Union victory, homecoming celebration and dance. 2 of my sons spent time in the Andersonville prison of war camp. But mercifully, all 5 of my sons returned home safely from the war. My son Edward was traveling with Sherman through Georgia when he was captured by some rebels. He and 3 other men were locked in the basement of a house, and a guard set over them, while the rebels got together to plan what they called a big-time killing. Well, while they were planning this killing, the slave of the household went down to the cellar and broke out the peach brandy. He provided peach brandy to all the rebels and to the guard, and when they all got tipsy drunk and fell asleep, then that slave let the men out of the basement, showed them their horses, and by the time everybody woke up, the 4 Union soldiers were long behind Union lines and safe. Well, that's only one of the stories that my sons could tell about their times in the war. But war brings so much death, so much destruction. Our president had been assassinated, and there were so many orphans, and they needed to be cared for. Now, we know from the good book that it is important for us to care for our widows and our orphans, and we decided to take that teaching and do something about it. After we established a statue for the soldiers in Greenwood Cemetery, then we began to take in orphans. At first, we put them in the American Hotel located on 5th and Main Streets. It was right across the street from the schoolhouse, and private donations helped to refurbish that building. But by the time there were 220 children there, that building was just about full and bursting at the seams. We knew that more had to be done, and so we came up with a plan. The citizens of Cedar Falls purchased 40 acres of ground on the south side of town, and a building was constructed beginning in 1866. By 1869, it was ready to be occupied by the children, where they lived, were housed, educated, and prepared for their life outside the orphanage. When they left the system, we knew the building would be empty, but we already had a plan. We decided that we would like to see that building become a place to train teachers. And in 1876, the Iowa State Normal School was opened. Now that area has had several different name changes over time. In 1909, it became known as the Iowa State Teachers College. In 1961, the name was changed to the State College of Iowa. And in 1967, it became known as the University of Northern Iowa, which is what is named today. Now, I lived for many years here in town, a very long life, and I outlived my husband and several of my children. You'll find us today resting peacefully at Fairview Cemetery on 12th Street. How many changes I've seen in this town over the years. It's been wonderful to see Cedar Falls grow and prosper and become the wonderful city that it is today. How many wonderful changes we have seen in our town.